Hello, everybody, and welcome to CyberClan's inaugural Incidentally Informed webinar. Today is our very first episode of this, and we are going to be covering the ABCs of cyber insurance. We thank you all for being here today. And just as a reminder, we will be recording this and making the recording available to everybody in attendance today. And of course, then you can feel free to share it with your colleagues and friends. We hope that this information is informative for you. So just briefly, I want to tell you a little bit about CyberClan. We are an end-to-end cybersecurity services firm, a managed security services firm. We provide what you'll call pre, boom, and post services. So we are here to help you assess your gaps and any other risk assessment services, pen testing, vulnerability assessments, so forth, via CISO hours, as well as risk management strategies. Additionally, we have a very robust international incident response team, IT restoration team, and of course, we have a virtual security operations center where we can do managed detection and response and 24/7, 365 monitoring. So we're excited to have you all here today and to introduce our partners at Beasley Canada. But before we get into the real deal here, let me just quickly introduce a few of my colleagues at CyberClan, Stephen Hampton and Chad Seneschal. I have to keep saying that name over and over again. If they could join me on screen for just a moment to introduce themselves and just tell us real briefly about their role within CyberClan. So Stephen and Chad, thanks for joining me here today. Can you guys just tell us a little bit about yourselves? Stephen, let's start with you. Oh, Stephen, you are on mute. It is 2021, and I know we're all so used to.
There we go.
There you go. All right, we can hear you.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here today. Stephen Hampton here, Senior Director on the Incident Response team that is working with our insurance partners, our legal partners across North America. And we also have Chad.
Hey, Chad.
Recently joined the team.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone who's joined. Chad Seneschal, and Senior Manager in the Business Development portion, which works with the insurance companies and the legal firms on creating partnerships so that we can be a preferred vendor.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys both for joining us here as panelists and attendees. We're going to go ahead and let you settle in with your coffees, especially you, Stephen. I know it's only 8 a.m. bright and early for you, but we'll certainly be bringing you guys back in case we get any questions from the audience that relate to incident response services. So thank you for attending here today. Just a few housekeeping rules. We do have a chat function. Feel free to chat with your fellow attendees throughout the conference. And also we have a Q&A function. You may see a raise hand button. We will not be actually taking live audience questions verbally, but we will take them off of the Q&A chat. So if you do have questions for our panelists or even for Stephen or Chad, please feel free to type those in there, and we'll try to reserve about 10 minutes at the end of the webinar to answer some of those questions. We'll also make sure that you get the contact information of everybody that's appearing on our show today. So briefly before we get started, I wanted to just quickly share a poll to the audience. And this is just to set some framework around who's familiar with cyber insurance and who's familiar with managed security services. So I'm just interested, I've started and launched this poll. If you see it up on your screen and you feel like answering the questions, we'd love to hear from you. I'll leave that up for just a second. So that we can all just see, okay, we've got a lot of people interacting here. So do you have cyber insurance? Yes, no, not quite yet, but I'm thinking about it. You have no idea what cyber insurance even is, which is great. You're here to learn today. Or no way, I'll take my chances. Highly don't recommend that, but it's always interesting to see. Additionally, do you work with a managed security services provider for your current cybersecurity needs? So we've got yes, no, not yet, but I'm thinking about it. And once again, I'll take my chances. Again, I'm not advocating for that response. And I'm glad to see we have 0 people saying that. So thank you guys so much for participating in this poll and getting us started here just to see how everybody's acclimated to the industry. Okay, so a good amount of people who actually have cyber insurance. So that's great. And a couple more that are thinking about it and a couple more that have no idea about cyber insurance. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this poll, but feel free to continue to answer it and we can share those results out at the end and relaunch it. But let me share the results here for everybody. So here's what we're looking at. About 54% of you answered yes to having cyber insurance. About 19% no, 19% not yet, but thinking about it. That's good. 8% of you don't have an idea. That's great. We're here to help you learn all of that today. And then as far as cybersecurity services, 46% of you guys said yes, 27% said no, 27% said not yet, but thinking about it. So that's great. And again, kudos to all of you. There was no one answering, no way, I'll take my chances. This day and age, we can't afford that. So I'm glad to see that no one responded with that answer. So without further ado, let me go ahead and bring on our panelists for today. We are very excited to be joined by Ria Tershonets and Jack Bottomley, both from Beasley, Canada. So if we could go ahead and promote them to the screen and welcome them to the show. And I understand we may be having some technical difficulties with Ria, so we may not actually physically see her on screen, but I believe she's dialed in. So fingers crossed this all works. And the day and age from working from home, we're all facing these technological challenges. So we appreciate her try here to get into the screen. But Jack, I can see you on screen. And Ria, if you can hear me, feel free to chime in and let me know that so that I know that you can hear me. Maybe people just can't see you.
Yep, I dialed
Perfect.
in. So yes, I had technical problems, but yep, I can hear everything.
That's great. Well, I am glad to hear your voice. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. And thank you, Jack, for being here. I want to just start out real quickly and give you both the opportunity to introduce yourselves, your positions and roles within Beasley, and maybe just give us a high level statement about what Beasley Canada or Beasley globally is all about.
Certainly. Ria, would you like to begin?
Sure. So my name is Ria Tershonets. I was previously with Cree Church at MGA that was purchased by Beasley. So altogether I've been there. I'm just going on my 20th year. I lead the SME team for cyber technology and miscellaneous in Canada. And yes, cyber is one of our growing book of business for sure. We're very, very busy, but yeah, that's about me. Jack?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jack Bottomley. I've worked with Beasley for 3 years, originally in London, recently relocating to Toronto, which I'm very excited about. Beasley is one of the top providers globally of cyber insurance. We've got a very, very large global book, and it all originated back when data privacy regulation was first coming into play around data breach, and we built a product with BBR services, which we can talk a little about today, that really try to help our clients walk through a cyber incident. So a lot of experience there writing cyber for well over 10 years, and very excited to talk to everyone today about what cyber insurance is.
That's great. Thanks so much. Yeah. And, we recently did a prospectus that we issued back in October that really tried to outline what's going on in cyber insurance and cybersecurity period. And the market is expected to grow to 20 billion by 2024, which really just shows the extraordinary measures people need to be taking and how we're all under attack. It's certainly all that you see in any kind of business news for sure, and a lot of just your local news period of all the breaches that are happening. So we are happy, as most businesses are, to have you all here to help us. So let's go ahead and get started with helping people understand what is cyber insurance.
Okay, I'm going to start that off.
Jump in there.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So cyber insurance is like an insurance policy to help protect companies from the fallouts of cyber attacks and hacking threats. It can help minimize your business interruption during these incidents and its aftermath, as well as protection covering any financial costs of some elements of dealing with the attack and recovering from it. A lot of business hold data, very private and sensitive data, which is part of a cyber attack. If this is compromised, it could lead to a third-party liability claim for sure. The triggers for the policy would be network security failure, which could include like a data breach, malware infection, cyber extortion demand, ransomware, or business email compromise. So I can go on to talk about what commonly is covered under a cyber policy. And so I'll talk about that, and then Jack can jump in and talk about what I've missed or add more comments.
Great.
So a cyber policy covers third-party liability, but also first-party coverage. The third-party liability would be your data network security liability, which would pay damages or claims expenses because of a claim made against the company for the data breach. Regulatory defense and penalties, and then you have your payment card liability costs, which is self-explanatory, I think. And then you have your media liability, which provides coverage for intellectual property infringement, other than patent, of course, resulting from the advertising of the company's services. It often applies to both your online advertising, including social media posts, as well as printing advertising. Then you can go into your first party loss, which helps insured with breach response costs for legal expense, computer security expert, your PCI forensic investigator, your notification of any affected individuals, setting up a call center, public relations and crisis management, also credit monitoring and identity monitoring. Your business interruption loss usually is resulting from a security breach, which is an unauthorized access or use of a computer system, denial of service attacks affecting the computer system, infection of the computer system by malicious code or transmission of malicious code from a computer system, or a system failure. It covers income loss, forensic expense, and extra expense. Also in business interruption, there's dependent business interruption, which means a company that is out, not the insured themselves, but is working for the insured to help them in their operations. You have your cyber extortion loss, which everybody is talking about because it's definitely on the rise. And it is extortion payment and or expenses incurred to prevent or respond to an extortion threat. Also, data recovery costs. So there's a cost incurred by the company to regain access to their or replace or restore the data that's been affected during the breach. And also e-crime. There's people call it social engineering. We call it fraudulent instructions, but it also covers fund transfer fraud and telephone fraud. So that's the policy in itself, but there's also add-ons that people add, such as reputational loss coverage, or what people call bricking, which is a computer hardware replacement cost, voluntary shutdown coverage, cryptojacking. So these are some extra coverages that are added onto the policy.
I'm curious, Ria, if you don't mind. You know, a lot of us typically see cyber breach as something that is done from outside forces as a crime, right? And a majority of it is. But I'm curious if the cyber insurance policies do also cover perhaps accidental incidents that happen as a result of negligence of an employee or a wrong move or something like that, because I know that the breaches can happen through many different ways. I'm curious if that's covered traditionally.
It is to a point. I mean, if it's criminal, no.
Correct.
But if it's an accident or, you know, if it's an ex-employee, then yes, the policy would respond.
Understood. And business interruption, of course, is one that we talk about a lot, because people don't necessarily always consider the fact that their business would be either shut down or completely interrupted as a result of the breach. A lot of people see these as privacy data breaches, but not necessarily, you know, the fact that if you're a manufacturer and perhaps your systems actually get shut down. I'm assuming that a typical cyber insurance policy will cover that based on what your industry needs are. Is that correct?
Exactly. And that, you're right, when you talk about manufacturers, lots of people, when they think of cyber, they think it's covering for the information that they hold on the system, which is true. But for a manufacturing plant, usually that's not an issue. What it is if they're automated, and if a virus goes through their system and shut them down, they may suffer a business interruption loss. So that's when the policy would jump in for sure.
Great. Well, so when someone's initially looking at a cyber insurance policy, how do they figure out what exactly they should be covered for, and how should they think about the pricing of a policy?
That's part where Jack, if you want to.
Great.
Yes, certainly. So it's a really interesting topic, actually, and sort of what comes first, the chicken or the egg. You know, ultimately the easiest thing that a client or a potential customer can do is find a knowledgeable broker with an understanding of what their competitors may be doing, to understand, you know, what people are generally buying and what people are getting covered. However, internally, I think it's important for all businesses, whether it's the smallest or the largest, to do a thorough impact assessment, understand where their sensitive data is, where their critical systems lie, and ask themselves the question, well, what happens if I no longer have access to these? What are the potential data liability regulatory requirements that I need to meet in order to protect this information, but also what can happen if things do go wrong. So there's some of the sort of initial questions that I would recommend companies look at and processes. They can, of course, get external help with those business impact assessments and to sort of assess their own risk. But of course, the easiest go-to option would be to speak to a knowledgeable broker.
Sure. And, hearing your accent, knowing that you just came over from London, this indicates that some people may have international organizations. And so how do people need to look at it if they happen to cross borders in the work that they do? I mean, there are different compliance and regulations. How they, would a broker help work them through that? Or do you need to get policies in individual regions?
Yeah, it's something we see quite a lot, actually, because traditionally property insurance, you might have one policy in the US, one policy per plant, however it works. But ultimately, with cyber and the interconnectivity of systems, there are commonly shared exposures that could impact all locations at once. So not only should that inform the IT governance of a business, making sure that there are no low-hanging fruit in some distant facility somewhere where attackers can get in, but similarly for insurance, having one global policy with a single insurance provider to offer incident response as well as coverage, and building a large tower of insurance to meet the limit requirements of that particular company is always our recommended option. If a company has multiple policies with different insurers in other locations, all of a sudden it becomes a question of, where did this happen? Whose policy should it hit first? I think it's better to have a consistent policy across the band, and certain insurers can certainly offer that. Lloyd's insurers syndicates, they benefit from global networks to issue policies in multiple locations. You can also rely on what's called a think clause, which allows any indemnity to be paid to the parent organization where that policy is held for their global operations.
Interesting. And so are there any industries actually that through regulation or compliance and governance are required to carry cyber insurance?
I'm sure there will be, in particular, to meet certain sort of framework standards. I know that there will be governmental organizations that are often
Right.
pushed to buy cyber insurance.
Financial, maybe.
In terms of, formal requirements, I couldn't honestly tell you. We
Yeah.
see people from all walks of life and all industries buying cyber insurance because they recognize it is a requirement. But in terms of the sort of regulatory requirements to do so, I'm not entirely sure, no.
Gotcha. Okay. I believe the financial industry probably has some significant guidelines in there, but again, this will all depend on your region. So make sure you're checking with your local government authorities on that. But I'm curious, how should people be looking at the pricing of a policy? What kinds of things impact the pricing of a policy?
So this is changing rapidly, and actually cyber insurance has changed so much over the last 10 years. There's new coverages, going away from the original data breach to business interruption, all the things that Ria previously mentioned, and it's a constantly evolving space. Pricing historically has always been driven by your industry, which sort of gives a nod to the types of exposure you may experience, and the revenue size, which actually is that fit for purpose in a very complex space? Probably not. Nowadays, particularly with the rise of ransomware, we are seeing a shift. Underwriters are asking a lot more questions. They're looking for certain standards to be met within IT security. Some of those can be multi-factor authentication for remote access to the organization, having a good understanding of your backup processes. So, through the underwriting process, we are now asking a lot more of clients. Some could say that that's a test. Others could see it as a service, identifying potential concerns and issues that will hopefully help clients guide them through their risk management journey. But we're certainly seeing pricing being driven more by security than sort of traditional industry and revenue concerns.
That's interesting because I was listening in on another webinar the other day where someone was talking about what you need to have covered and how do you, do you get good driver discounts, if you will, if you're comparing it to getting, car insurance. And that in the past, perhaps that was more of a consideration because the maturity of people's cybersecurity posture wasn't necessarily there. But to your point, considering how many people, especially within the industry that are getting hit with ransomware and the massive payments that are now being requested, we all know that this is hardening the market and making it very difficult to insure people. And so it seems to me, at least, and I don't know how formalized this is, that there are certain requirements now that may not have existed a few years ago, that to even get to having a policy in the first place, you have to overcome. Is Beasley, do you have some of those types of standards already in place for things that you just have to have in order to even be qualified to get a policy?
It's difficult to confirm as black and white as if you don't have this, you don't get the policy. We look at risks across a number of different areas, and actually, I think a lot of insurers do nowadays. So there are certainly standards that we look for. There are certainly red flags within that. I think, remote access MFA is one that everyone keeps talking about, but also having good backups. In a ransomware incident, the difference perhaps between paying a ransom or having to rebuild an entire system from scratch, which takes a lot of time and a lot of money, is your backups.
Right.
So that's something that a lot of people look quite closely at, but it's difficult because all things change for different markets. But what we are certainly seeing is a focus on security and an attempt to raise the bar. Insurance is there to pay for those losses, and those losses are not going to go away given the sophistication of these attackers. But what I think the insurance market is trying to do is, by raising the standard and forcing our clients to have these sort of considerations and conversations, hopefully some of the frequency events that can be avoided with better hygiene will leave capacity in the market available for those sort of more catastrophic, sophisticated attacks.
Right. And just out of curiosity, you just mentioned catastrophic. That makes me think of a lot of people who maybe don't have standard health insurance, but get catastrophic policies. Is that a thing in cyber insurance, that someone may pull out an add-on or an addendum just to cover things like a ransomware attack and to cover the actual payment? Because I know there's also a lot of questions around sanctions and things like that for ransomware payments. How is that discussed or covered in a policy?
So the policy is pretty comprehensive, and it will include all of the coverages that you sort of mentioned there around extortion payment, etc. I don't think many markets will provide just a simple ransomware policy with extortion, a bit of forensics investigation.
Right.
It tends to come with all the other bells and whistles, because a ransomware incident really does trigger multiple parts of the policy. You've got the incident response piece, forensics investigation, etc. That might lead to a data breach. So then you're covering off liability, potentially notification of customers. All in the meantime, your systems are down. Does that impact your revenues? And therefore you're having a business interruption loss. And then ultimately you need to, so there are many, many parts of a policy that are triggered within a ransomware incident. Of course, the payment of ransoms to certain groups, that is very much a legal consideration and something that is being looked at very closely with the guidance of governmental organizations and sanctions groups. But certainly, I think when you're buying a cyber policy or a fit for purpose cyber policy, it's funny how perfectly suited it is to handling a ransomware incident.
Sure. Now, again, I'm always one to try to bring back things to analog situations to help people really wrap their minds around the concept. And so I know, again, in health insurance, you're thinking pre-existing conditions. What do I need to be worried about? Are you at risk at not getting a policy if you have, in fact, been breached in the past, or how is that brought into the conversation?
I can, well, we're finding that actually when companies have had a breach in the past, it's not an automatic decline or anything, because lots of companies, once they've had that breach, then they rebuilt their system and they put in more security and more protection. So it's actually sometimes a much better risk.
Right. I would agree. They get healthier. Anyone who's been through one certainly doesn't want to go through one again, and so that they know that they need to ramp up all of their fortresses against the cyber criminals out there. So that's good to hear, because I think a lot of people might get scared away and don't realize. And certainly there is a cost to securing your business, but as you mentioned before, this is becoming a cost of doing business. It's even if it's not a requirement by any regulation. This is your business on the line. And I think we saw a statistic, especially for small to mid-sized businesses, that 60% of them fail within 6 months of a breach. So, people need to take their cybersecurity posture very seriously. And so what things do people, are there standard exclusions from a cyber policy that people need to think about?
Ria, do you want to take this one?
Take that?
I mean, I look at our exclusions and they're pretty standard across the board. I don't think it's that one insurer versus another insured, that there's different ones that wouldn't be just common to a cyber policy. The one thing that is, though, that people should think about is professional services is excluded under a cyber policy, because in actuality they should have an E&O policy that responds to that, and because the cyber would not.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
There's also a few others. The bodily injury or property damage exclusion is quite an interesting one. That's also brought conversations, and there are parts of the cyber insurance market that are looking at this. Again, cyber insurance is a very young space, and I dare say it will change a lot more as we go past. But then, like Ria said, there's a lot of standard stuff in there, prior known acts. If you've got knowledge of an event, you quickly run and buy a cyber policy, it won't be covered. Any sort of criminal intentional acts are in there as well. So I think one of the interesting one is the sort of trading losses and loss of money and discounts. Now, there are cyber crime elements of the coverage, whereby fraudulent instruction, money is transferred, but any sort of trading losses, they won't be necessarily covered. And of course, any sort of loss of money or tangible property can also be excluded as well. So there will be some exclusions in a policy that are definitely worth reading. So I encourage all policyholders to go and read the policy thoroughly and make sure they're asking these questions of their brokers and raising any scenarios that concern them to make sure that it is covered.
That's great. And so we talked a little bit about how most people do see cyber breaches as affecting privacy data, right? Especially if you're a retail business or things like that, releasing credit card information and so forth. And then we briefly talked about, well, in a manufacturer's situation, you might actually have a a problem with the manufacturing equipment going down. Is there any other obvious but not obvious situation that we should think about as a cyber, maybe something that you guys have come across in a case where, people need to remember that this is also something that happens as a result of a cyber breach? Putting you on the spot here, but.
No, I think it's a really interesting one. Ultimately, cyber insurance is extremely broad. The market has incredibly broad wordings and coverages. So, if we acknowledge that a cyber attack will do one of two things, it will either access data. Now, data is another broad term. We're talking about PII there, but we're also talking about information that your business relies on to do its business.
Sure.
So you have to ask yourself, if you lose access to that information, what happens? Whether it be the impact to the revenues or any regulatory requirements. So it's a very, very broad policy. And I think if you can answer the question positively to, does your business rely on computer systems to do its work?
Right.
Or, does it have any sensitive data? Of course, going back to the original point, then you need cyber insurance. It really is that broad.
Right.
Because the cyber insurance is going to help you recover your systems with additional services and get that business back up on track.
And how much should people, if you have multiple suppliers, so you're a retail environment, but you rely on manufacturers to supply all of your goods and services, how often or how critically should you be examining the policies of those suppliers for your business?
Absolutely. Doing proper due diligence against your outsourced providers is a fundamental part of risk management in cyber, particularly with the interconnectivity of the world, whether it be your IT vendors, understanding what their standards are. Perhaps you require them to have ISO certification, etc. That's going to be fundamental to really understanding the risk of your business to downstream impacts. I think it's absolutely fundamental to have that knowledge, and also to be prepared that if one of your suppliers does go down, what's your continuity plan? It's well and good to have a continuity plan for your own business, which all companies should have in the event of a cyber incident. But what happens if one of your suppliers goes down, one of your IT providers? Do you have backups, alternative providers? If it's an IT question, are they giving you good redundancy of service? That can take on many forms. But asking those questions of your providers is fundamental to making sure that you have that additional security.
So that actually, I'm going to freestyle here for a second. I haven't prepared you guys for this question, but that leads me to another question. So if, for say, and there was actually a case like this in the summer, I happen to know because my husband worked for one of the manufacturer's distributors, and it was a real supply chain nightmare where the manufacturer of the window products was actually hacked. But then everybody upstream from that was impacted by that hack. Either the truck stopped, they couldn't figure out where they were all going, they couldn't fulfill orders into the distribution centers and then further into the retail and the end clients. So if that happens and you're all the way sort of at the top of the supply chain, does a cyber insurance policy for you kick in to cover any kind of losses as a result of that? Or is that a different policy that you would go to if your business was interrupted due to a breach down the line in your supply chain?
Of course. So most cyber policies do offer dependent business interruption.
Okay.
So ultimately covering losses incurred due to a stop of your business because of an impact at another. Now, there are certain conditions that tend to be applied there. One, whether it's IT or non-IT vendors. If it's an IT vendor, we're talking about your critical applications, etc., things that are hosted by a third party, websites, etc., that you have a written contract with. It will always be dependent on the organization that you have a written contract with. If it's 3 or 4 down the line and it's a long-term impact, chances are it may not be impacted under the policy. But if it's one of your direct suppliers that has a cyber incident and they admit it, then yes, coverage under that policy should stick.
Great. Well, I see we have actually quite a few questions coming in from the audience. So I'm going to switch over to some of those. Let's see. Does cyber insurance cover spear phishing attacks that lead to payment of amounts to a malevolent third party?
Ria, do you want to take that one?
Ria, are you there with us?
That's okay. I'll jump on that one.
Okay.
Yeah, so essentially we're looking at fraudulent instruction coverage. So yes, that would be covered under the policy. There tends to be a sublimit for crime on cyber. So definitely ask, how that works for your policy. But yeah, there should be some coverage in there. If not, it is available in the market.
Great. And I will note that, spear phishing, 90% of all hacks are done as a result of social engineering and phishing attacks. And so just as a quick plug to everybody to make sure that you are, in fact, educating your workforce on what that looks like. And there are plenty of security awareness training programs out there. We certainly offer some, but there's plenty on the market that can really help your employees be able to be more tuned in to identifying those types of things. So be sure that is some activity and action you're taking to make sure that your company is as safe as it can be. Let's see. Another question is, I would like to know if a firewall is a requirement with Beazley to obtain cyber insurance.
Yeah, it's a good one. I think it would certainly look badly on an application if there was no perimeter defenses, right? It's like having a castle wall with an open door. We really do see. I mean, I'm not even sure that that's a question on an application. I think most people would expect firewalls to be in place. We do ask about configuration of the firewalls, deny all by default for those techie people out there, things like that. We do, of course, like to see. So certainly if there was a company that didn't have any perimeter defenses in terms of firewalls, yeah, I think it would certainly be a question of when can those be put in very, very quickly.
Right.
An additional layer, having internal firewalls, segmenting the network. That's always a very positive thing to see when assessing a cyber risk. So certainly firewalls, yeah, we do look at those quite closely nowadays.
So when someone comes in and they give you they fill out the questionnaire, and then you identify a few moments there and you're going, wait a minute, you don't have a firewall. Hold on, let's talk about that. You don't have this, you don't have that. But they're coming to you for the first time, and maybe they're a small organization and don't have an IT department. Are you all then stepping in as the player to say, well, let us help connect you to individuals that can help you fill those gaps? I mean, because I imagine for some people, they're coming in to get their business insurance as a whole. They're spoken to about cyber insurance, and they wouldn't know where to start on how to get some of these things implemented.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think one of the the most important thing that the cyber insurance market has to do now is really step up. We're asking a lot of questions of clients, and we need to be able to provide them with some solutions. So there has been a big shift towards pre-incident services, and a nod to people such as CyberClan who do provide those on behalf of insurers. There are also some insurers out there that can provide some of those services in-house. So absolutely. Personally, I can only speak for myself. When I do have a risk that I'm not willing to write, I always make sure that I give a thorough account of why and where some of the gaps are, with the hope that in the next 12 months, if the client has been proactive and maybe covered off some of those concerns, then we'll always receive them fondly again. And it's funny to what we said earlier. Once a cyber incident happens, it's so incredible how quickly budgets and action can happen.
Right.
It's a shame that it takes often that eventuality to kickstart the projects. But of course, if they can do it beforehand, then it's only going to benefit them in the long run.
Sure. And just sort of following that line of conversation, when you are actually picking a policy, similar to a life insurance policy, sometimes the insurance agent would say, we think you need a $5 million policy. You say, well, I really only want 3 million, or maybe it's property insurance for a company, corporate asset that you have. In cyber, is that the same type of negotiation you can do where you can potentially, lower the amount that's covered, and therefore, maybe miss the mark? And I say this because I heard someone speaking about this the other day saying, we've assessed your property as being a $5 million manufacturing facility. We think you should insure it for 5 million. Guy comes back and says, well, I really only want to pay this. So let's insure it for 3 million. And, being in this really strange situation of going, but if you, in fact, if it burns to the ground and I only come back with 3 million to help you, you're missing it. There's a $2 million delta. Is that the same type of negotiation that goes on when you're actually pricing a cyber insurance policy?
Absolutely. I have actually declined to quote risks whereby the client has asked for a limit, which, given their risk profile, just does not seem adequate. And we are really talking about the big issues there, the cat loss environments. I mean, nowadays, for sort of a larger SME / mid-market client, the forensics costs alone to actually investigate an incident such as ransomware can really stack up. It can be in the hundreds of thousands, ultimately. So, it's really important that they're buying a sensible limit. And again, going back to the earlier conversation, doing a full analysis of the company's risk, get some third parties in to help with the business impact assessment, speaking to a broker to understand what similar companies are buying, and really try and make sure that you're making an informed decision. The worst thing to happen is a client buys not enough limit. They end up having having to pay a ransom that is more than their insurance limit. And yeah, like you say, a lot of companies can go bust if they don't sort of play that carefully.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think it's unfortunate because, of course, most human instinct is to believe, well, I'm just being sold something, but I'd argue that if you have an insurance broker or an underwriter who's willing to say, here are all the reasons why I'm rejecting you, or I'm really telling you I can't sell you that policy in good conscience, it's not a sales tactic. Listen and be mindful of, evaluate. And in fact, the person that said, sure, let me sell it to you, ask those important questions, because you do want to be protected. And to me, it sounds more like a service to say no, as opposed to fine, I'll sell it to you at the lower policy amount.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see, we've got another question. If a client has an attack and does not change any practices and still has the same insurance, will that client be covered if another breach happens, or does the client have the responsibility to improve their security posture after an attack?
So I think absolutely the client has definitely got the responsibility to do that. In terms of if they had a second attack and it was covered, I have had accounts that have had 3 incidents within the space of a year. They didn't exhaust their limit, and we continue to pay out. Of course, the contract is there. What happens at renewal is certainly going to be an interesting conversation. And I think the best thing a client can do is learn from their mistakes, be proactive, and help themselves. If they do that, and an underwriter is seeing the client is doing the right things, then the renewal terms will be more favorable than if they're not. If they don't learn from their mistakes and they're not looking to partner with an insurer, they just want their capacity, then they might find that that insurer is no longer looking to partner with them and trying to remarket an account that has had issues with a poor
Right.
risk security profile. They're going to struggle.
It's really, to me also, and I'm pretty new to the cyber insurance industry or the cybersecurity industry, only a year in now, but something that's ringing a bell for me is also to be sure that you're really involved and engaged with your forensics team and your remediation team, because some of those breaches can happen because someone hasn't properly locked things down while they're investigating and while they're repairing your system. So you want to make sure that you're operating on all cylinders with the vendor that's actually helping you through there, so that you're not leaving holes, right?
Absolutely. We've seen in the past people, have thought recovery is the main thing. I've got backups here. I've had a ransomware incident. I've got backups. I'm going to just do the backups and move on. A ransomware incident in particular is a complete compromise of an environment. They don't just come in and pull the trigger. They've been in there looking around, trying to find your crown jewels. It's very important to make sure you do a full investigation. Try to make sure that any sort of backdoors aren't going to be left open, so that you can confidently move forwards. I think, having proper vendors engage with an incident, experienced vendors is absolutely critical.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to another question here. To expand the question on IT and manufacturing and other businesses, any comment on the alignment of equipment insurance and cyber insurance? So combination policies.
Of equipment insurance, are we talking about property damage
So
there?
as I understand equipment insurance, and I think we spoke with HSB on this, it's typically it's been, originally for boilers and machinery that might have, been shorted by an outage or something. So the machine actually breaks and needs to be replaced.
Sure.
But there are cases where a cyber insurance attack would in fact impact that machinery. So would a cyber insurance policy cover that, or should you be holding an equipment insurance policy alongside of your cyber insurance policy for that very type of incident?
Absolutely, apologies there. Yes, so most cyber insurance policies now will include bricking coverages,
Right.
which is essentially what we're referring to there. A cyber incident that renders hardware useless can be recovered under those bricking sublimits in a policy. So
Gotcha.
there is coverage for that now. It's sort of broadening the realm into the property damage space without fully being there.
Sure. Now, you briefly touched on this, but someone else has asked the question, so I want to make sure we cover it completely. How does a cyber incident affect policy renewal? Do insureds have to prove that they have made improvements? Just to hammer this home.
Yeah, of course. So ultimately, after an incident, any good forensics company will offer recommendations, right? Based on what's happened, here's things that you can do to improve. The best thing a client can do is take those seriously, so that when the renewal conversation does come around, you can say, look, I know we've had an incident, but here's all the things that we're doing. It's going to make you look much more attractive. As Ria mentioned earlier, once a client's had an incident, it's not necessarily the end of the world, right? The insurer's paid out, but as long as that client is now taking the risk seriously, then there'll be a better long-term partner with that insurer. Insurance is all about long-term relationships. We're prepared to pay losses, of course. So we're looking to help our insureds improve themselves, and taking that proactive approach is certainly going to help maintain a good relationship with your insurer or other insurers that are reviewing your policy afresh.
Sure. And this actually, again, I'm going to take you on a left turn here, but I'm hoping I haven't mixed up these terminologies, but this makes me think of betterment. And so when you've been hit, if the vendor that's been working with you through your breach services comes back to you and says, we've now done a formal assessment of your system, and in order for you to avoid this in the future, this is what you need to do. Will your policy actually cover making those changes to your system?
Yeah, it's a really interesting piece. And I do know that there are parties out there that do offer full betterment, where the existing system is maybe no longer available and the only option is an upgrade. It does sort of challenge the fundamental principles of insurance, whereby you're meant to restore to a position no better than where you were prior to the incident. But there are coverages out there. For Beazley, we don't offer full betterment. Where we would position ourselves is sort of an economic contribution towards the upgrade. recognizing that system upgrades are a part of risk management. If you've got an unsupported system, looking to upgrade that as soon as possible is certainly going to be helpful. If you have an incident that leads to that, then there should be some coverage towards the upgrade. Some policies will pay for the full upgrade. It really will depend on the language.
Great. I don't see any other questions coming in on Q&A. If anyone else has them, I'm just going to check the chat to just be sure that someone hasn't accidentally put something in there. I do not see any questions over there. We'll give everyone just one more minute to maybe shoot some questions off. And in the meantime, Ria, I don't know if you're still there, but I'll go ahead and just flip it over to you if you have any final thoughts for everyone to consider when thinking about cyber insurance.
Sorry,
No.
my cat thinks phone is a toy, so he batted it on the floor, and I was trying to get it when you asked the last question. Sorry about that.
It happens.
No, I don't have really anything else to add. I mean, Jack's was pretty thorough in explaining our coverages and what we do and what we look at. And one thing is that he was mentioning backup. So I know it's really important that the companies have a backup and that it's segregated from their main operation. But the other thing that's really important is that they do integrity testing on their backup once in a while to make sure that it is backing up correctly and that the data is not corrupted in any way. Because we have found that on a few incidents that have happened that the forensics have gone to go get their backups to restore their data, and the backups are actually no good. So that is an issue. So that's one important thing that we do ask our clients to check once in a while, like, to do integrity testing on that backup.
Gotcha. It looks like we've got one more question. Let's see. For an organization taking first looks to improving their IT security and looking at cyber insurance as part of this, any first step suggestions?
I'm no consultant. I'm an underwriter. I do like to take
yeah,
I was going to say that there are definitely people that you can speak to do a risk assessment. And actually, by completing an application for cyber insurance, you're halfway there, and you're going to get some recommendations from an underwriter that maybe leads to conversations with third parties, people that can do a consultancy, a review of your environment. So definitely reach out to companies like CyberClan. That there's so many people out there that can offer this sort of service, and that will kick off your risk management journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to note, of course, this potentially will come across as a sales pitch, but it is important to talk to a managed security service provider that works frequently with insurance, I think, because not every MSSP does do that. Not every incident response team does do that. So having that really in-depth knowledge of how the insurance industry works really does help you build your policies and your planning in response to what the insurance companies will be looking for, and additionally in response to what they will cover on the back end. So I do think that that's something to keep into consideration when working with an MSSP is that would be one question I'd add to a checklist when evaluating who's going to be doing your security is, do they have a full understanding of cyber insurance, how you get it and how you're covered if a breach were to happen. So let's see, we've got another question here. Is business interruption a standard component of cover or an additional option cover usually?
I'd say nowadays it's standard.
Pretty standard, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that was all the questions. One that came up for me, and I think we did an in the news segment on this a couple months ago, but there was a big case where I think it was over in Asia or Europe, where a company was charged, there was a wire transfer fraud. So someone had emailed the CFO and said, pretending to be the boss and said, go ahead and transfer that $10 million over to our account. And the CFO went ahead and did it. And I think it might still even be in court over this, but the insurance initially said, look, we're not going to cover it. That was actually negligence on behalf of your employees. You should have policies in place where people are making sure that, transfer requests are actually being double checked. How much is that becoming a standard modus operandi? Because I don't know that everyone realizes that you do bear some responsibility on you to be sure that there are proper things in place within your organization to make sure you don't fall, mistakenly into that trap of transferring money, especially when you can't verify that it's the CEO truly asking you for that. Has that become more standard that you're requiring those types of policies and governance be shared?
Yeah, like even on our application, when it comes to the e-crime portion, we have questions that actually ask the insured or the company, do you have these procedures in place? Do you ask a second person before you transfer money? Do you verify other than by the email, like phone them or whatever, if there's changes made to their vendors, do they make a phone call to make sure that it's correct? So there are procedures that we ask that they have in place before we would consider providing that coverage.
Great. Yeah. And back to your point, Jack, filling out an application for cyber insurance will likely bring up a lot of these options for you. And again, reaching out to a company like a CyberPlan who can help. If you're not familiar with all the different ways that a cyber breach can happen, best to turn to those either on the insurance side who can say all the types of crazy things that they've had to cover, or with a breach response company for all the crazy things we've had to help respond to. Because sometimes it really does sound too crazy. It sounds like, no, there's no way that could actually happen. We all know about the emails we get about the uncle in Nigeria that needs money. And we all think, oh, of course I would be able to identify that. But social engineering is a very, very real and scary thing. And the AI involved in it has gotten very, very good. And so really being able to hear, no, that crazy situation actually happens more often than you think is truly helpful for you to wrap your head around what exposure you really have in your company. So I see we were getting a few questions about whether there is a recording of this. Yes, we are recording this, and we will provide a link for this in the email that we send out after the webinar so that you have a link to share with others that you'd like to hear all of this really important information. So I'll just turn to you guys. Any final parting thoughts for our audience today on the ABCs of cyber insurance, and then we'll wrap up for everybody.
Ria, anything?
No, I'm good.
I guess the thing that I'd sort of like to leave off is, we've talked today about all the different things that a cyber policy can be, and it really is a fantastic product. If you're going out to buy cyber insurance, if you're renewing your policy, be critical of the product and the company that you're partnering with. Make sure you're getting exactly what you need from your insurer. It's not necessarily going to be cheap to get the best product out there, but nothing ever is. But with partnering with a top insurer, you will get fantastic services. The cyber insurance market really has progressed from just providing money to really helping clients improve their security and guiding them through an incident. And it's got a good reputation for paying out as well. There's always going to be the odd story, but as a whole, the insurance market is very reliable when it comes to cyber. So that's the only thing that I'd probably leave on as another shameless plug for the cyber insurance market. But I think it's definitely worth recognizing that you get what you pay for.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Jack and Ria, we very much appreciate both of you being with us today. We are blessed to be partners with your organization, and we appreciate all the work that you do to make sure that people really understand the risks that their businesses are exposed to. So thank you both so much for being here to provide all of this really detailed information around cyber insurance. As a reminder to everybody else, we will send out an email with the link for this video, as well as some information from Beasley about cyber insurance policies, and you'll have the contact information for everybody that was on this webinar today. So thank you, Jack. Thank you, Ria, for being with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're looking forward to one of your colleagues, Priya, joining us in just a month. We will be doing this the third Thursday of every month. Thank you so much.